Billionaire CEO insults black waitress and lost 3.5 billion deal instantly. At the St. Regis Aster Court, wealth sounded like crystal breathing and chair legs sliding over marble. A harp traced a silver thread through the room until a tremor ran along that music and snapped it. A single red drop slid down a glass, fell, and burst against Victor Langston's tuxedo. Nia Carter, calm eyes, steady posture, moved with a folded napkin. Victor's gaze didn't meet her. It measured her. He spoke softly, and the word he chose carried more ice than volume. A blade meant to cut without leaving blood. Forks hovered. A guest forgot to swallow. The harpist's hands stalled above the strings. Somewhere a phone camera found focus. Nia did not back. She dabbed the stain and lifted her chin. Voice even, "Sir, I'll replace the glass and handle your bill." That composure pressed against Victor's pride like a mirror he refused to face. His smile looked polished by habit, not kindness. He caught her wrist just long enough to claim the moment. At the far seat, Elias Grant touched the water goblet before him, as if steadying the table or his temper. His eyes traveled from Victor's grip to Nia's knuckles, and then to the chandelier, counting witnesses. A server, pale, took a backward step. By the doors, two hotel managers compared glances and pretended not to. Across the table, a push alert lit a screen. Markets poised for historic merger. Someone whispered, "Not tonight." The room held its breath because something larger than a stain was spreading. It moved along glass, across social feeds, into the spaces between names and reputations. 60 seconds from now, one sentence will erase a fortune. 10 seconds sooner, a truth nobody expected will decide who speaks it. Count the cameras, count the witnesses, but you will miss one tonight. The Bordeaux held steady in the crystal until a guest's elbow nudged the air and a bead broke loose. Nia lifted the decanter in a clean arc, ready to pour, and the base touched the rim of Victor Langston's glass, drawing a red line across the crease of his tuxedo. The sound was nothing, a soft kiss of glass on glass, but the room heard it anyway. The harp's notes wavered. A server hesitated with domed plates. Victor's eyes dropped to the stain with disbelief so practiced it almost counted as charm. The smile he wore for photographs flattened into something colder. He spoke in a low, private register designed to reduce a person and preserve his poise. The word he used carried rote. It came wrapped in polish, but its core was old and malicious. Silver clinked, stopped. The harpist missed a string and turned the miss into a flourish. Phones face down were inches from waking. Nia set the decanter on a sideboard and reached for a fresh napkin. No tremor touched her hand. She studied the stain without blinking, then said, "I can arrange cleaning or a replacement jacket. Your course will remain hot." Her voice carried across the cloth without sounding like a challenge. She shifted a candle 2 inches to shield the stem from heat, rescued a listing glass with a fingertip, and created order as if she had planned the disaster. Victor leaned back and let the chair sigh. "Competence should not be complicated," he murmured, letting the sentence travel only far enough to mark territory. He dabbed the linen at his lapel and dropped it by her hand like a document he no longer needed. "Next time, focus." His tone moved like a knife kept in velvet. Guests looked away in the learned way. "Ignore the small harm so the evening can continue." "Sir," Nia said, seltzer touching fabric in careful taps, "your evening will be seamless." She did not pretend the insult had not landed. She refused to give it a second life by echoing it back into the air. She made the work the answer. He lifted his water and deliberately let a bead fall to the linen as if gravity reported to him. He watched for a flinch. None came. He smiled without warmth. "Invisibility is the point of service," he said. "Not loud, not public, just cruel enough to bruise." He glanced toward Elias Grant, seeking approval that would not arrive. Elias did not speak. His fingers circled the stem of his glass with the patience of a person measuring current before turning the wheel. Plates advanced again. The captain caught Nia's eye. She nodded. Steam rose in small spirals from elegant bowls. Conversation resumed at half volume, sentences landing like rehearsal lines. The room attempted to recover its shape, but a tilt had begun. Nia worked the stain like a watchmaker. "Please keep still," she said, tone precise, not plead. Victor shifted his shoulder a fraction to force a miss, pleased when she had to adapt. She adapted. The mark faded. Tiny noises amplified the tension. A banker set down his knife with a click. A board member stared at the chandelier as if crystal could offer counsel. The harpist chose a piece with longer rests, and each pause widened the quiet. Victor placed his hand too near the base of the glass. Nia steadied. His thumb grazed her wrist. Not a shove, not a yank. Possession dressed as impatience. She slid her hand away in a motion that read as control. 90 seconds for your course, she said. I will return at 85. It sounded like timing. It was also a boundary. Try not to convert that into another estimate, he replied. Same low toxin. He wanted her small. He wanted witnesses to agree. Habit almost helped him. Elias let his fork rest. His gaze moved from Mia's hands to Victor's mouth, then to the nearest phone, angled a degree too high. He recognized an old pattern and a new record of it. Still, he kept silent. Stillness can be an instrument too. Mia turned to leave. The cuff of her sleeve tight. Victor's fingers had found fabric. She stopped because swift movement would create a second mistake for him to exploit. She looked at his hand until he pulled it back. Thank you, she said, and walked toward the pantry with a spine that refused to bend. She passed a dark wood mirror and caught the scene at once. A table arranged like a portrait, cautious faces, a man at the far end, whose restraint could halt a tide, a man at the near end, mistaking fear for respect. In the corridor, a busser asked if she needed anything. Replacement jacket, she said. The hotel kept one for moments like this. Systems, when respected, protect people. At the table, talk tried to return to safe lanes. A director asked about compliance frameworks. A vice chair told a museum anecdote that meant nothing but filled space. Phones hummed. In the lobby, a producer lifted a camera and checked light without pointing it at anything. Mia returned with the garment bag. A courtesy, she said. A seamstress is on call. Victor accepted the jacket with a half smile designed to look gracious. He stood a fraction, made sure everyone saw the gesture, then sat with theatrical calm. She adjusted the cloth so the crease he had made would not hold. The red thread had almost vanished. The insult had not. It hung in the chandelier's glow like smoke that would not lift. People tasted it with their next sip and found the wine heavier. A junior associate typed a note with timestamps and initials in case an ethics committee asked. Across the table, a guest remembered a teacher who mocked a classmate's accent and felt her face burn with delayed shame. Another guest remembered an uncle who told jokes that were not jokes and decided silence was a choice she would not make again. If you have ever watched someone be made small by a polished voice while a room looked away, hold that memory and stay with this table, because justice sometimes walks in on quiet feet and still turns on the lights. Victor lifted his refilled glass, found no mark to blame, and smirked anyway. He asked about revenue targets, tone bright, as if the previous minutes were a scheduling glitch, not a scar. He did not know that rooms can add every glance, every whisper, every sliver of video compounds. Elias finally placed his napkin on the table. He did it without sound, without performance. He watched the way Neil aligned plate, cutlery, and glass for each guest, building harmony from broken seconds. He watched the phones that were watching back. He saw consequence unspool in quiet thread, inch by inch toward a knot no one would untie. Victor leaned toward a director and made a joke about resilience, as if he owned the patent. The director smiled and considered exit plans. The harp returned to its opening motif. Patient, bright, screens glowed a little stronger, like fireflies that know a storm is traveling across the park. Some guests still believed the evening belonged to Victor. Others felt the ground slide. The linen did not move. The crystal did not blink. But the balance had changed. And by the time dessert menus appeared, the night had already begun writing itself in a dozen pockets at once. The Bordeaux held steady in the crystal until a guest's elbow nudged the air and a bead broke loose. Naya lifted the decanter in a clean arc, ready to pour, and the base touched the rim of Victor Langston's glass, drawing a red line across the crease of his tuxedo. The sound was nothing, a soft kiss of glass on glass, but the room heard it anyway. The harp's notes wavered. A server hesitated with domed plates. Victor's eyes dropped to the stain with disbelief so practiced it almost counted as charm. The smile he wore for photographs flattened into something colder. He spoke in a low, private register, designed to reduce a person and preserve his poise. The word he used carried rote. It came wrapped in Polish, but its core was old and malicious. Silver clinked, stopped. The harpist missed a string and turned the miss into a flourish. Phones, face down, were inches from waking. Naya set the decanter on a sideboard and reached for a fresh napkin. No tremor touched her hand. She studied the stain without blinking, then said, "I can arrange cleaning or a replacement jacket. Your course will remain hot." Her voice carried across the cloth without sounding like a challenge. She shifted a candle 2 inches to shield the stem from heat. rescued a listing glass with a fingertip, and created order as if she had planned the disaster. Victor leaned back and let the chair sigh. Competence should not be complicated, he murmured, letting the sentence travel only far enough to mark territory. He dabbed the linen at his lapel and dropped it by her hand like a document he no longer needed. Next time, focus. His tone moved like a knife kept in velvet. Guests looked away in the learned way. Ignore the small harm so the evening can continue. Sir, Naya said, seltzer touching fabric in careful taps. Your evening will be seamless. She did not pretend the insult had not landed. She refused to give it a second life by echoing it back into the air. She made the work the answer. He lifted his water and deliberately let a bead fall to the linen, as if gravity reported to him. He watched for a flinch. None came. He smiled without warmth. Invisibility is the point of service, he said, not loud, not public, just cruel enough to bruise. He glanced toward Elias Grant, seeking approval that would not arrive. Elias did not speak. His fingers circled the stem of his glass with the patience of a person measuring current before turning the wheel. Plates advanced again. The captain caught Naya's eye. She nodded. Steam rose in small spirals from elegant bowls. Conversation resumed at half volume, sentences landing like rehearsal lines. The room attempted to recover its shape, but a tilt had begun. Naya worked the stain like a watchmaker. Please keep still, she said, tone precise, not pleading. Victor shifted his shoulder a fraction to force a miss, pleased when she had to adapt. She adapted. The mark faded. Tiny noises amplified the tension. A banker set down his knife with a click. A board member stared at the chandelier as if crystal could offer counsel. The harpist chose a piece with longer rests, and each pause widened the quiet. Victor placed his hand too near the base of the glass. Naya steadied. His thumb grazed her wrist. Not a shove, not a yank. Possession dressed as impatience. She slid her hand away in a motion that read as control. 90 seconds for your course, she said. I will return at 85. It sounded like timing. It was also a boundary. Try not to convert that into another estimate, he replied. Same low toxin. He wanted her small. He wanted witnesses to agree. Habit almost helped. Elias let his fork rest. His gaze moved from Naya's hands to Victor's mouth, then to the nearest phone angled a degree too high. He recognized an old pattern and a new record of it. Still, he kept silent. Stillness can be an instrument too. Naya turned to leave. The cuff of her sleeve tightened. Victor's fingers had found fabric. She stopped because swift movement would create a second mistake for him to exploit. She looked at his hand until he pulled it back. Thank you, she said, and walked toward the pantry with a spine that refused to bend. She passed a dark wood mirror and caught the scene at once. A table arranged like a portrait. Cautious faces. A man at the far end, whose restraint could halt a tide. A man at the near end mistaking fear for respect. In the corridor, a busser asked if she needed any replacement jacket. She said, the hotel kept one for moments like this. Systems, when respected, protect people. At the table, talk tried to return to safe lanes. A director asked about compliance frameworks. A vice chair told a museum anecdote that meant nothing but filled space. Phones hummed. In the lobby, a producer lifted a camera and checked the light without pointing it at anything. Naya returned with the garment bag. A courtesy, she said. A seamstress is on call. Victor accepted the jacket with a half smile designed to look gracious. He stood a fraction, made sure everyone saw the gesture, then sat with theatrical calm. She adjusted the cloth so the crease he had made would not hold. The red thread had almost vanished. The insult had not. It hung in the chandelier's glow like smoke that would not lift. People tasted it with their next sip and found the wine heavier. A junior associate typed a note with timestamps and initials in case an ethics committee asked. Across the table, a guest remembered a teacher who mocked a classmate's accent and felt her face burn with delayed shame. Another guest remembered an uncle who told jokes that were not jokes and decided silence was a choice she would not make again. If you have ever watched someone be made small by a polished voice while a room looked away, hold that memory and stay with this table, because justice sometimes walks in on quiet feet and still turns on the lights. Victor lifted his refilled glass, found no mark to blame, and smirked anyway. He asked about revenue targets, tone bright, as if the previous minutes were a scheduling glitch, not a scar. He did not know that rooms could be added. Every glance, every whisper, every sliver of video compounds. Elias finally placed his napkin on the table. He did it without sound, without performance. He watched the way Naya aligned plate, cutlery, and glass for each guest, building harmony from broken seconds. He watched the phones that were watching back. He saw consequence unspool in quiet thread, inch by inch, toward a knot no one would untie. Victor leaned toward a director and made a joke about resilience. As if he owned the patent, the director smiled and considered exit plans. The harp returned to its opening motif. Patient, bright, screens glowed a little stronger, like fireflies that know a storm is traveling across the park. Some guests still believed the evening belonged to Victor. Others felt the ground slide. The linen did not move. The crystal did not blink. But the balance had changed. And by the time dessert menus appeared, the night had already begun writing itself in a dozen pockets at once. Nycorder learned courage in spaces that rarely said her name aloud. She grew up in a two-room walk-up above a laundromat, where steam slipped through floorboards and winter smelled like soap. Her mother worked double shifts, returned with aching hands, and taught 3 rules. Show up, tell the truth, keep people safe. Those rules turned into habits before Naya learned the language of budgets, schedules, and boards. After homework, she counted coins in a jar labeled tomorrow. On Sundays, she walked for groceries with a list written in block letters, memorizing prices and routes. Patterns appeared, trouble visits fast, help travels slower. Her brother Micah arrived early and fragile. Doctors spoke softly, yet filled their sentences with numbers, charts, and cautions. Therapy had to be constant. Structure would anchor progress. Money would decide both access and reach. Naya watched her mother nod while measuring rent, groceries, and bus fares inside her head. She began tracking Micah's breathing, posture, and focus like a lookout marking stars. When he cried through the night, she read picture books until morning and learned patience that does not collapse. Small gains deserved celebration. Setbacks needed reinforcement, the kind that strengthens without announcing itself. During senior year, a letter with a gold crest offered a policy scholarship that could have changed everything. Tuition, housing, meals, and a map to rooms where decisions move first. She held the paper beneath a kitchen bulb and could almost see clean sidewalks leading to classrooms. 2 days later, the clinic expanded Micah's program: morning sessions, afternoon drills, weekend intensives, and strict transport windows. Their mother could not shift hours without losing seniority. Calendars collided. Naya looked at the letter, then at Micah tracing shapes on the table, and chose the path that kept him steady. She folded the offer and told herself that chosen duties still counted as a victory. She found work wherever hours opened. Shelves needed stocking, receipts needed entering, and tables needed clearing. She learned to stretch meals without letting dinner feel small. On breaks, she studied for classes she did not attend, chasing knowledge because curiosity remained hers to protect. Late nights on the fire escape, she watched windows across the street blink awake like constellations and promised that years might bend, not break. When exhaustion pressed hard, she set a timer and breathed with it. 5 slow counts in, 5 slow counts out, then returned to task. Stability grew from quiet rituals, lists, alarms, and notes taped beside the fridge. A neighbor mentioned a hotel training track downtown. The building had marble corners, quiet elevators, and orchids that glowed. The pay beat retail, and the schedule could wrap around clinic appointment. Trainees learned service choreography, allergy protocols, knife angles, wine notes, and safety checks that turned chaos into calm. Naya signed up for wages and found a new subject: power. She discovered how status speaks through tone, timing, and posture. She noticed who looked at name tags and who looked past them. She learned that doors made of glass still hide thresholds, and that good systems teach, even when people believe only money talks inside them. Micah's progress measured itself in small victories. He counted steps to the bus stop, learned to ask for help without fear, and clapped along at choir even when the rhythm lagged. Each milestone felt like a lantern lit along a road that once seemed dark. When he knocked over a glass and froze, Naya said, "Accidents mark moments, not worth." He repeated that sentence until it sounded like armor. On long afternoons, they practiced travel routes, snack plans, and words to use when crowds pressed too hard. Confidence grew one rehearsed minute at a time. At the Regis Aster Court, training began with dish names and ended with silent signals. Naya kept a pocket notebook and recorded everything: which guests liked still water, which leaders listened to, which managers protected staff. She practiced balance until plates felt like planets in a system only she could see. She treated dignity as part of the uniform. Serving, she decided, does not reduce a person. Serving prevents collapse and restores order. She studied each role surrounding the table to learn how decisions actually move. She learned to walk through noise without absorbing it. Boundaries could be practiced, and she mastered them without letting kindness drain away. Two regulars sharpened her understanding. Elias Grant visited without fanfare, returned glasses to coasters, and thanked staff by name. When a junior server switched two plates, he offered a short nod and said, "Let's fix this together," and the room relaxed. He asked careful questions that treated people like adults. Naya did not romanticize him. She simply noted that power and care can share one sentence. His presence taught a lesson about steadiness. Real authority does not need volume, only clarity. She wrote that line in her notebook and underlined it twice. Victor Langston arrived in Gus. He handed off his coat without seeing the person holding it. He edited dishes before tasting them. Smiles for cameras, then a flat line the moment shutters closed. Everything near him became a test. He praised himself for ruthless decisions that sounded like unpaid overtime to everyone else. Naya answered with professional precision and stored the pattern like a caution sign. By comparing the two men, she learned the difference between excellence and vanity. She wrote another note: leadership can either lift a room or drain it without raising a voice. Their mother aged faster than calendars admit. Some mornings her hands trembled while tying back her hair. Naya doubled shifts and saved tiny sums toward a future built on more than emergency. She enrolled in online lectures about ethical technology, privacy consent, supply chains, and whistleblower protections. She underlined case studies where companies confused convenience with consent. She also learned to say no. When a guest pushed a boundary, she named it without a C. When anyone treated staff like furniture, she set a limit and moved on. Respect lives in actions, not speeches. Evenings off belonged to Micah. They walked by the river and counted fairies. He liked to imagine hidden rooms where workers kept the city bright. She said those rooms exist and that he would help light them someday. They practiced scripts, celebrated small independence, and phoned their mother before bedtime. The plan replacing the scholarship sharpened with time. Study power up close, save responsibly, return to school without abandoning care, and build something that lifted family and neighbors together. If someone in your life once seemed easy to overlook, take a breath and remember them now. Stay with Naya, because quiet strength often changes outcomes long before the world even notices, reshaping power with patience. By the time the merger dinner arrived, Naya had mapped the Aster Court like a strategist. Charts a harbor. She knew which doors narrowed, where lighting shifted, which tables produced conflict, and which guests thanked without looking up. She entered with a measured breath, checked the decanter balance, and aligned settings to protect hands and plates from harm. Guests saw a professional who never rushed. They did not yet see letters folded for later, buses caught in rain, lectures watched at midnight, and the decision to stand steady without hardening. The foundation built across years traveled with her into the ballroom, ready for whatever tested it. Victor Langston did not inherit an empire. He inherited arguments. At a cramped oak table, his father preached a doctrine that rewarded the coldest hand. Praise arrived rarely, and always with conditions. Missed chores accrued interest like overdue loans. Victor learned to convert feelings into ledgers. While other children traded baseball cards, he traded obligations, kept notebooks of favors, and monetized apologies. He discovered that fear, trimmed into rules, can feel like efficiency. The lesson hardened into instinct: win first, justify later. High school turned instinct into craft. He mastered debate without raising his voice, cutting opponents off with smiles that looked polite on camera, yet ruthless on paper. Group projects taught better math: take credit, disperse risk, deliver the summary early, and frame outcomes before anyone else can edit the narrative. Teachers called him focused, classmates called him useful, and kept their distance. He treated deadlines like traps and courtesy like leverage, and he learned how to make a hallway feel like a corridor of deals. Business school refined appetite into a method. He sat in the front row not to flatter professors but to steer the discussion toward leverage. Cases praising harmony bored him. He hunted paragraphs about covenants, distressed notes, liquidation preferences, and exclusivity windows. His emails sounded cooperative while narrowing choices to options he preferred. A summer on a restructuring desk felt like discovering a language he already spoke. Spreadsheets bleeding red gave him purpose. Turning them black gave him a high. He loved the quiet after a layoff memo, the way a building held its breath. His first full-time role placed him inside a firm famous for turnarounds. Town halls with frightened crews became a theater. He presented closures as pivots, kept security near doors and timed announcements minutes before long weekends, so protests expired without an audience. He greeted union stewards with coffee, then filed injunctions that cut bargaining to ribbons. He never yelled, he did not need to. Precision delivered the same result, and press releases praised focus, while parking lots filled with stunned silence. Promotions followed because numbers did. When suppliers resisted, he scheduled midnight talks so exhaustion negotiated for him. When a plant demanded safety upgrades, he squeezed contractors until corners shaved themselves. He paid bonuses for adaptive throughput, a euphemism that converted skipped breaks into heroics. Quarterly calls applauded discipline. Analysts repeated phrases about operational excellence. The market learned to expect surprise beatings of guidance, followed by triumphant narratives about capacity realignment. He called it leadership. Everyone else called it pressure with polish. The acquisition that made his name look charitable from a distance. A founder had misread a platform shift. Victor offered a rescue loan with covenants sharp as blades. Board seats became voting control. Research budgets fed marketing. Warranty claims vanished into arbitration mazes. Customer support shrank until delays felt geological. Earnings leaped. A magazine cover crowned him a savior who says hard things and does harder things. Employees felt the air turn metallic. He bought a glass house with a view of water which he never had time to touch. Philanthropy arrived as stagecraft. He funded a science camp, then fought for hazard pay during a heat wave. He donated to clean water, then lobbied for pipeline exemptions that shaved his logistics costs. His speeches praised grit, clarity, and hunger. Compassion, he told interviewers, belongs to private life. Markets punished softness. Reporters printed the line because returns made the quote sound wide. The applause built walls high enough to echo only numbers back at him. He rebuilt his leadership bench around obedience. Assistants rotated yearly, selected for stamina, and replaced before burnout became a headline. Executives survived by anticipating preferences and editing agendas to avoid friction. He mapped meetings like war games. People entered rooms carrying decks. Victor entered carrying outcome. He drew invisible boxes on notepads and placed colleagues into cells labeled driver, shield, liability, or replace. Those who argued ethics reached the door faster than those who edited their doubts into silence. A public crisis offered his next ramp. A rival suffered a breach. Victor purchased distressed paper, floated editorials about rebuilding trust, then acquired the company for less than its cash on hand. He issued a memo declaring speed before caution. Another breach followed. Outrage surged. He paid a fine that looked huge to families and small to funds, launched a scholarship program and hung billboards with soft gradients and the word future. Traffic returned. He called the episode proof that turbulence rewards bold pilots. He judged empathy as a kind of fraud. Stories about hardship bored him because narratives distract from scoreboards. When a manager presented wellness data, he reached for a calculator. When someone argued that paid leave reduced turnover, he asked how much pressure the remaining crew could absorb. He arranged internal contests for bonuses and then criticized bruises, claiming competition builds character while weeding out the timid. A therapist suggested listening. He attended 3 sessions, concluded that empathy muddies decision quality, and canceled the rest. Drift began beneath the surface. Younger founders framed growth around responsibility. Courts amplified the privacy doctrine. Students confronted recruiters about supply chains. Victor felt a tremor in the old map and answered with more force. He slashed procurement to prices only desperate vendors would accept, leaned on politicians to delay safety rules, and threatened to relocate headquarters when a city considered mandatory rest breaks. Returns recovered. His belief hardened dominance works and anything softer invites failure. Image management became a ritual. Cufflinks with quiet shine, a watch is measured in grams, shoes that never squeaked. He timed entrances to seize the air, kept water slightly warm so a server would hurry, and used tiny corrections as signals that he remained the most exacting man in any room. He practiced dismissing people while looking directly at them. The act broadcast control without noise and taught bystanders to imitate disdain, hoping proximity might substitute for courage. Family gatherings offered reminders that tenderness survived somewhere, yet he experienced affection like microphone feedback, useful for volume, dangerous for clarity. He sent gifts instead of apologies and considered that maturity. On holidays, he told stories about deals that ended with standing ovations from boards and very quiet nights in parking lots. He delivered punchlines with satisfaction and called it stoicism. When a cousin frowned, he believed good intentions lived in results, not in. Aster Court fit his philosophy like a tailored jacket. Power would sit at one end, money would sit at the other end, cameras would polish the illusion of consensus. He viewed staff as ambient infrastructure, present to maintain glide for whichever dignitary needed altitude. He expected a powerful investor to be as transactional as he was. He expected the night to obey him the way rooms had obeyed him for years. Seating, lighting, and angles were calibrated before the first flute was poured. Before the dinner, he rehearsed the merger narrative, until it sounded like a hymn. 3.5 billion would be his melody, into which sounded like a hymn. 3.5 billion would be his melody. Integration, the harmony, governance, the reassuring drum. Layoffs rebranded as redeployment, compliance repackaged as smart guardrails. He pictured headlines pairing his name with relentless and visionary. Advisors warned that phones record everything now. He replied with a bright grin and a daggered question. Did caution ever build empires? Silence followed because he had cultivated silence as a skill. His creed threaded every stage of ascent. When something resists, press harder. When a community complains, overwhelm it with spectacle. When an employee falters, swap them for someone hungrier. Apologies waste momentum. He called decency a luxury for the unambitious, and wore impatience like armor. Consider as his story turns the leaders you have known who prize power over integrity, the managers who confuse intimidation with excellence. Hold that memory and stay close because the reckoning you expect is approaching. The path that built his fortune also narrowed his sight. Habits that revived failing divisions taught him to ignore people until they produced data. Skills that won negotiations trained him to treat trust like a chip to trade rather than a bond to protect. The audience he cultivated to clap for punishment grew smaller each quarter, replaced by partners who would rather miss one target than mortgage their names to cruelty. He missed the change because arrogance filters the signal from the noise. Confidence, once disciplined, mutated into entitlement. He arrived at the St. Regis, certain the chandelier answered to him. He believed the carpet rolled itself out. He believed crystal would never tremble in his grip. When a red thread streaked his jacket, he felt confirmed in his right to hurry the world. When his mouth formed a word shaped to belittle, he heard poise not rot. When his fingers found a wrist, he thought impatience, not harm. Years of triumph convinced him that consequences could be managed with statements and price swings. He never accounted for a room that would not look away. He never accounted for phones that would not forgive. He never accounted for a waitress whose calm refused to shrink, and a financier whose silence measured the cost of arrogance. The doctrine that raised him had never met a chandelier that could dim a fortune in one evening. The habits that once impressed boards would by midnight expose a hollowness numbers could not cover. He believed the night belonged to him. The night was already learning his name. The stain had almost vanished, yet Victor kept hunting it, as if a faint thread could justify his temper. When Neo reached to lift his empty glass, he caught her wrist. 2 fingers and a thumb closed with proprietary pressure. The gesture of a man who believes rooms obey because he is present. Silver paused midair. Focus, Victor murmured. Verdict disguised as advice. The smile sat on his mouth, not his eyes. Some roles are simple. Try not to decorate them with mistakes. His voice rode lower than conversation, smoother than the wine, edged with contempt. His grip tightened. Nia did not wrench away. She looked at his hand like a craftsperson inspecting a dull tool and deciding it had stopped deserving the work. Sir, release me, she said, balanced as a tray. Your course will be warm. She turned her forearm a few degrees, making space without spectacle. He refused the cue, certain the room would accept his lesson. At the far end, Elias Grant set down his fork. The sound traveled farther than any speech. He lifted his water and returned the glass to its ring. His gaze rested on Victor's fingers, moved to Nia's face, and then to the nearest phone tilted a shade too high. I said, focus, Victor whispered again, letting a poisonous word follow. Older than the carpet, wrapped in polish. This jacket costs more than a month of your life. His thumb pressed bone. A manager took one step, then stopped when Victor's glance cut like a quiet blade. Nia did not flinch. I see the stain, she answered. It won't define the night. Her free hand steadied the glass so no ripple betrayed her pulse. Elias folded his napkin once, then again, corners exact. He stood without haste. The harpist lifted both hands from the strings, leaving the last note suspended. Mr. Langston, Elias said, quiet enough that people leaned in. Remove your hand. Victor did not comply. He smiled like a headmaster correcting posture. "We're fine," he told the table. Service drifted off task. "I'm providing guidance." His fingers stayed where they were, a demonstration masquerading as order. Nia breathed once. 60 seconds for your course. Take your hand away. She rotated her wrist again. Not enough to bruise, enough to draw a line. Elias looked at the bracelet on her arm, the silver catching candlelight. He touched his cuff where a narrow band matched. Years ago, he gave that bracelet to a difficult child who learned bus timetables by heart and practiced being brave. "Victor," he said, removing ceremony with the first name. "That is my daughter." The room tilted. A server paused, plates hovering. A director's smile died. Someone whispered, "What?" into a napkin. Victor blinked, calculation racing behind his stare. Yet he still did not release. "Investors make everything theirs," he said, trying cold humor. "Even sentiment. Adopted." Elias continued. "She carries 2 names on paper, and one that matters here, because you are touching her as if she were furniture." He took a step, not enough to shove, enough to share the weather. "Remove your hand." Phones rose, some inch by inch, others with the reflex of muscle memory. Managers stopped pretending to ignore it. A reporter near the foyer whispered into an earpiece. Hashtags began writing themselves. Victor exhaled through his nose. "Absurd," he said. "I'm preventing another spill." He glanced toward the cameras, deciding whether to pivot or double down. Arrogance answered for him. "Do you plan to derail a historic merger over a misplaced napkin? Over a boundary?" Nia said, steady. She inclined her head toward Elias, not seeking permission, simply recognizing a fact spoken at last. Her bracelet flashed and several guests understood. Elias didn't raise his voice. "There will be no agreement tonight," he said, each word cold. He looked at the table, not the phones. "Document what you must. Capture this. A leader who confuses dominance with worth." Victor laughed once, dry. "You can't be serious," he said. "Markets won't punish decisiveness." He squeezed again. Small, controlled. Nia freed herself. The motion was efficient and final. She stepped back, set the glass away, and stood with her shoulders level. "Continuing service," she told the captain. "Table 3 first, then here." Guests began narrating with their eyes. A junior associate held her phone chest high, simply recording. A partner texted counsel, Holt's signatures. Beyond the doors, a producer mouthed, "Go," and made a call with the word exclusive. Elias lifted his glass and set it down gently. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, receiving silence as if reserved. "Talks are canceled. An organization capable of this scene is unfit to steward platforms that touch millions." A ripple crossed the table, then a wave. 3.5 billion seemed to lift like steam and disappear. Someone whispered, "Wait," as if a clock could be reset by pleading. Victor stared as though dignity could be negotiated like freight. "You'll regret this," he said. "Pitch higher now. Emotions fade. Assets don't. Integrity doesn't fade," Elias replied, "but it does remember." Nia gathered plates without hurry, performing the craft that had always been hers. She didn't celebrate. She didn't shrink. She balanced the room so it could exit without breaking. In the mirrors, phones rose like a forest of thin silver branches. A manager reached for the dimmer, thought better, and left the lights bright so no shadow could argue later. A partner stood, then sat again. A director stared at the ghost of the stain and understood how small an accident is beside a choice. The harpist allowed the unresolved chord to fade into quiet. Victor tried one last performance. "A misunderstanding," he told the nearest camera. "Context will clarify." He angled his body to hide his empty hand, then saw the move revealed more than it covered. Viewers would see what mattered: the grasp, the word, the refusal. Security approached, not for violence, for gravity. The captain asked softly, "Sir, will you give us space to clear?" Victor did not answer. He looked at Nia as if the night could be bent back into obedience. It could not. Elias offered his arm. Nia glanced at him, then at the team, then at the hall where service waited. "I'll finish my side," she said. He nodded. Recognition respects agency. He turned to the room once more. "Send the footage to whoever needs courage to move." Then send resignations, if your companies prefer silence. People rose with the tentative grace of passengers. After a long flight, conversations scattered into corridors. Phones uploaded. Outside, a breeze tugged at flags as if the avenue approved the correction. Inside, the chandelier resumed its glitter. no longer a crown for one man, now simply light. Victor stood alone at a table, set for triumph, staring at a jacket he could replace and a moment he could not. Nia walked past, carrying plates that did not The deal unraveled in real time, thread by thread, watched by a world newly fluent in naming what it sees. Triumph did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived as composure holding its ground, as truth spoken quietly, as a hand finally letting go. The chandelier kept shining, yet the room no longer belonged to Victor. Elias's calm cancellation moved through guests like a cold current. Chairs scraped, and talk collapsed into controlled exits. People left in pairs pretending to chat while hurrying to the doors. The captain redirected servers with signals that kept trays away from the center table. Managers lowered radios and widened an aisle. Rumor outran dessert. By the time coffee reached the far wall, the story stepped outside and started walking across screens. Waitress steadied plates, gathered glass, and kept colleagues safe. Night shifted from performance to evidence. The room felt it. On X, the first clip appeared with shaky hands and unblinking audio. 20 seconds showed everything. Victor's grip on Waitress' wrist, the quiet slur, her steady refusal. Elias naming her as his daughter. The sentence ending a $3.5 billion deal. A second angle landed minutes later. A third captured phones rising like silver branches above crystal. Hashtags burst across feeds. Aster Court, dignity first, hands off, 3.5 billion. Not your furniture. Translations added captions in Spanish, French, Arabic, and Urdu. Editors trimmed silence into impact. The algorithm found heat and pushed the story worldwide before chauffeurs had reached the curb. Screens replaced whispers. Chairs began sliding immediately. Inside, Victor drifted from cluster to cluster, searching for an ally who had not escaped. A producer who praised him last quarter avoided his eyes. Directors reclaimed coats with practiced speed. Two guests thanked Naimia softly and tucked envelopes beneath plates as deliberate punctuation. The harpist loosened the strings with hands that trembled from holding still too long. The hotel manager asked Naimia whether she wanted a break. She shook her head and finished her section. Because completing tasks steadies a shaking world. Her team matched her pace without forcing conversation. Forming a shield, service moved forward while reputation moved backward. Outside, black cars aligned like chess pieces. Elias's driver held the rear door and waited. Elias looked back through the glass. Naimia adjusted a centerpiece so a candle would not scorch linen, then steadied a tray for a newer server. He typed a message to his communications lead. Cancel joint releases. Suspend briefings. Prepare a statement naming the value broken. Protect staff. No theatrics. He added a final line. Return every reporter's call with facts. Then he entered the car with the expression of a man who knows storms. Sometimes clean the air and reveal the shore. Keep timelines fully transparent. Victor stood inside a circle that widened by the minute. Without an audience, his jacket looked ordinary, and his smile lost purpose. He thanked the captain in a tone meant for cameras that had already moved on. He called his communications chief and demanded control of the narrative. She explained the narrative was public property. Now, he asked for legal. She answered the video collapses argument. He ordered the valet to bring his car to the front. The valet complied, then stepped back as if distance could blunt fallout. Victor's certainty thinned, but habit told him markets reward force. He believed. By midnight, finance channels pulsed with overlay. Still frames froze the facts. Victor's hand on a wrist. Elias setting down his fork. The caption, "There will be no agreement tonight." Analysts trimmed price targets on air. A fund manager said culture is risk, and risk has cost. Another said leadership is a brand, and this brand just cracked. The after-hours chart fell like a curtain. Commentators tried to cushion the drop with hypotheticals, but the tape kept replaying and numbers obeyed video. Traders posted screen grabs, circled candles, and wrote one word beside them: deserved. Guidance looked fragile before sunrise. Naimia clocked out. She accepted water from the pantry lead and thanked every teammate on shift. The manager offered to call a car. She chose the subway because routine gives the mind a place to stand. She texted her mother, "Long day, safe, home soon." On the train, she sat near the door and watched the city pass as layered reflections. A woman across the aisle met her eyes, nodded once, and looked away. A pledge that strangers can be kind without asking for any story. Naimia exhaled and let quiet replace applause. She held the rail and breathed slowly. At home, Micah slept with an atlas across his chest. Their mother waited with tea and a question she did not need to ask. Naya told the shorter version and never repeated the ugliest word. When she finished, her mother pressed a hand to her cheek and said, "You did not bend." They kept the window open a crack so night air could rinse away the noise. Sleep arrived late and left early. Morning climbed the buildings with headlines already printed in light, and the city looked ready to judge swiftly. They ate toast, checked alarms, and chose calm clothes. Pre-market screens glowed red and trading apps buzzed. The stock leaned over a ledge before the opening bell, then stepped off. 10 minutes later, the exchange triggered a volatility halt. Advertisers paused campaigns. A state pension fund announced a governance review. 2 directors resigned before lunch. A coalition posted a chart of workplace complaints that had gathered dust. Employees demanded an independent culture audit, a hotline answered by humans, and protection for anyone who spoke about abuse. St. Regis released a statement: full access to security footage. Staff safety is non-negotiable, and gratitude for the team that protected guests. The note spread. Victor attempted a live apology on a business stream. He wore a subdued tie and spoke in measured tones. He said context matters. He said pressure creates confusion. He said he respects everyone who keeps experiences smooth. The chat was filled with timestamps and quotes that needed no context. The host asked whether he would accept an independent inquiry. He dodged and pivoted to innovation. The dodge traveled farther than any apology could. Elias gave one interview at dusk outside a community center and said accountability begins when nobody is watching, then thanked staff and asked companies to check foundations. Protesters gathered outside headquarters with signs printed overnight and chants tuned for phones. They demanded resignations, reforms, and contracts that anchor dignity. Employees pressed their faces to the windows and felt a tilt toward action. A product manager leaked a memo showing cuts to privacy budget. A lawyer posted a letter refusing to enforce non-disparagement clauses against staff who reported harm. Afternoon brought guidance withdrawn and partnerships paused. A university returned a donation. A sports league said it would revisit a naming deal. The board called an emergency session, retained outside counsel, and issued careful verbs while the stock failed to bounce. Naya finished another shift with the same steady posture. She walked past a new mural, 2 painted hands open like a welcome. A stranger asked for a photo. She smiled and kept moving. By evening, the board placed Victor on leave and appointed an independent chair to audit culture, contracts, and complaints. 2 days later, the market found a floor still far below the week's open, and analysts added a line with no formula: moral damage. She returned to the floor, poured, served, checked safety, and left quietly without speeches, while Victor watched a sentence echo everywhere: dignity is non-negotiable. Morning light stretched across the river when Naya walked into Elias's office for the first time. No cameras waited. He offered tea and thanked her for the steadiness that kept a volatile night from breaking. Then he outlined a proposal that would change the path beneath her feet. The firm needed a guardian who could anchor ambition to conscience and convert values into procedure. A role with authority, not ceremony. Direct access to the board, veto power over launches that violated consent, budgets that could not be shaved, and audits that published failures and fixes. Chief Integrity Officer, he said. Someone who would set guardrails before momentum raced caution. Naya asked about independence. Shields against retaliation, plain language, equal protection for contractors, and community outreach. Elias agreed and added one measure of success: resolved cases, not publicity. She felt a door open and said yes. She texted her mother a heart and told Micah to expect pizza after therapy. Orientation felt like scaffolding. Naya wrote a pledge on a card and taped it inside her notebook. Protect truth, protect people, protect the future from shortcuts. She placed her bracelet by the keyboard like a compass. At dawn, she walked through the building, meeting custodial teams, security, engineers, receptionists, kitchen staff, new hires, and managers. She asked simple questions and wrote careful notes about places where strain hid under competence. Within a week, she launched 3 channels: a hotline with trained listeners and quick callbacks, an anonymous portal that issued tracking keys, and a steward network selected by peers. She paired them with a promise that lawful reporting would never be muzzled, and retaliation would end careers. A product team soon pitched a feature that joined browsing history to location trails to enrich personalization. The deck looked clean, the numbers large, the consent story thin. Naya froze the rollout and convened an open forum. Engineers, designers, legal, sales, and support filled a room with folding chairs. An engineer sketched a safer design, The legal proposal proposed stronger terms. Marketing redrew the pitch. 2 weeks later, the team shipped a version built around opt-in, minimization, and deletion by default. Forecasts dipped, then recovered as the press praised restraint. Compliance turned into steering. Training spread. Workshops taught people to interrupt, disrespect, and document without drama. Simulations showed managers how to receive hard news. Quiet rooms let tense conversations pause before harm surfaced. Contracts adopted a dignity clause for vendors and drivers. When legal warned about cost, Naya showed curves from firms wrecked by scandal. The numbers told a blunt story. Arrogance is expensive. Respect returns value. Beyond those walls, headlines matured from outrage to specifics. Governance, consent, safety, labor. Universities invited Naya to guest lecture about service as a path to leadership. She brought checklists and stories about choosing courage when silence seemed easier. Students asked how to stay brave while paying rent. She answered with allies, documentation, and small networks of care. On a Saturday, she brought Micah to a community build where volunteers installed ramps. He timed crews and high-fived carpenters after each finished step. Meanwhile, Victor's arc bent toward consequence. Leave became resignation. Investigations cracked open emails that treated harm like background noise. Sponsors withdrew. A class action gathered thousands of names, alleging unpaid overtime and retaliation. Regulators imposed fines large enough to sting. Directors who once clapped wrote public letters about duty. Victor attempted another apology on a business stream. Chat windows filled with times, asked whether he would accept an independent audit, resign from remaining boards, and fund restitution. He pivoted to innovation. The pivot landed like a stone. Naya refused to narrate his fall. She put energy into building something worth inheriting. She published a quarterly integrity report listing complaints, categories, resolution times, and anonymous summaries. Where failures appeared, fixes followed. The firm funded scholarships for service workers moving into compliance, security, or data protection. Applications arrived with stories from kitchens, warehouses, clinics, call centers, and hotels. Many had kept rooms alive while others took credit. She hired fellows and paired them with mentors who respected both grit and craft. Industry signals shifted. Procurement teams asked vendors for ethical supply chain attestations and proof of worker voice. Compensation committees added dignity scores to bonus formulas. Venture funds wrote term sheets linking governance to access. A coalition of companies, unions, and consumer groups released an open consent standard that any platform could implement. Media outlets ranked boards on cultural reliability. Customers rewarded transparency with patience during glitches. Analysts began writing about moral capital as an asset. You can grow or burn. Slides changed. Fewer euphemisms. More commitments. Boards updated charters to include worker voice, privacy by design, and emergency stop powers that could pause launches without approval. Investors began asking founders for dignity plans alongside revenue models. Journalists started tracking whether promises became policy within a quarter. Schools added modules on ethical escalation. Unions and management met earlier, and fewer disputes became crises. None of it looked dramatic, yet the baseline moved, and people who kept rooms running saw themselves inside the story at last. 6 months later, a reporter asked what had changed inside her. Naya said nothing essential had changed. She still arrived early, listened hard, named harm without theater, and wore the bracelet that once steadied a frightened child. Her office displayed a small photo of the Aster Court chandelier, not as a trophy but as a reminder that light gives shape. She brought cookies to hotel staff on an evening off and offered free training for any hospitality team that wanted stronger tools. The captain smiled and said the room felt safer just hearing the offer. At a community event, local founders displayed work built with care. Micah managed the schedule with a clipboard. When Naya stepped to the microphone, she kept her remarks short. She spoke about rooms that teach you to shrink, and about steady hands that hold boundaries until others find courage. Then she offered a quiet invitation that sounded like friendship. If a moment in your life once asked you to defend someone's worth, share that story tonight with a friend and pass this forward. Because one voice can place courage within reach for the next person who needs it. Applause rose like a soft tide. Elias shook her hand and stacked chairs beside teenagers trading jokes. Later, under a violet sky, mother, daughter, and brother walked home slowly, passing a mural that showed 2 open palms. Micah traced the outline with a fingertip and said the hands looked like the city when it finally learned how to hold people without squeezing. Change kept building. Job postings for integrity officers multiplied. law clinics paired with unions to share compliance strategies. A library of anonymous case studies lets firms learn from mistakes without hiding them. Lobbyists who once called regulation a stranglehold found fewer buyers. Conferences gave main stage slots to builders who could explain how to speak frankly and still protect dignity. Even hardened investors started planning in decades, not quarters, because trust, once visible, compels patience. On an ordinary morning, Naya stood at her window and watched fairies cut wakes like clean lines. She thought about a glass that tipped, a word that never should have been spoken, a grip that tried to make a person into a prop, and a steadiness that refused. She texted her mother and told Micah to bring the atlas after dinner so they could choose a short trip by train. Work would not end. That fact comforted her, meaning lives where people keep each other whole. Before leaving, she read one last case note. A facilities worker had flagged a contractor for blocking vents. The team halted the job, fixed the hazard, and paid overtime, so nobody lost wages. Naya signed the approval, closed the notebook, and switched off the lamp. In the corridor, elevators chimed. The building hummed. She stepped into a day made of ordinary choices, carrying a compass shaped like a bracelet, and walked toward meetings where power and dignity could share the same sentence. I stand before you not because one man lost a deal, but because millions of us are deciding what leadership means in real life. Across cities and time zones, you watched a simple boundary tested and a simple answer given. Dignity is non-negotiable. My name is Naya Carter. I learned steadiness in small apartments, on late buses, and under bright lights, where service is choreography and respect is a choice. I am here to talk about integrity, not as a slogan you tape to a wall, but as a daily practice you can hold in your hands and teach to a friend. Power without dignity leaks value. Leadership without compassion loses the room. Results without fairness unravel. We can do better together. I am speaking to founders, workers, investors, artists, students, and parents from New York to Nairobi, London to Lahore, Toronto to Sydney. You do not need a title to change culture. You need a compass. Leadership is not a spotlight. Leadership is a method. It sounds like telling the truth in rooms that reward spin. It looks like building products that respect consent, even when shortcuts sparkle. It feels like choosing fairness on days when deadlines bite. It means refusing to use people as a cushion for ambition. It is the discipline of asking, before every decision, who is protected, who is exposed, and how we will repair harm if we cause it. Some people still claim empathy weakens results. The evidence says the opposite. Teams that treat people as a whole learn faster, ship safer, and recover from mistakes with less drama. Integrity is not a soft accessory. It is an operating system for hard weeks. It requires channels that listen, budgets that do not disappear when earnings wobble, audits that publish fixes, and leaders who accept oversight the way pilots accept weather reports. My firm is not perfect, but we show our numbers, fix what breaks, and protect the voices that help us improve. To boards and funds, I offer a promise and a challenge. You will not lose returns by protecting people. You will lose value by ignoring them. Charts react to scandal because communities refuse to bankroll contempt. Treat culture as a core asset. Tie bonuses to safety, fairness, and repair. Demand independent reporting channels. Expect apologies with action, not slogans. Publish timelines for fixes. Make dignity a condition of capital, the way you require audited financials. When you set that bar, leaders rise to meet it, and the market follows. To creators and Gen Z builders who move imagination at the speed of a scroll, turn reach into responsibility. Make content that honors human limits. Spotlight workers who keep your cities alive. Call out practices that hide harm behind design. Share templates any shop, studio, campus, or startup can use tomorrow morning. Subscribe to voices that teach accountability. Unfollow what normalizes cruelty. Use your platforms to set a tone your younger cousins can copy with pride. You already know how to turn views into movements. Now turn movements into policies people can touch. To everyone who still feels small after a day that asks too much, you are not alone. Integrity is a team sport. Find two allies and agree to protect one another in public and in private. Rotate who speaks first so courage does not calcify into roles. Celebrate course corrections, not just wins. Remember that kindness pairs with strength and boundaries pair with respect. I learned those truths while carrying trays beneath glittering light. You can learn them in offices, kitchens, warehouses, classrooms, studios, and on the streets. Wherever you work, make dignity the rule, not the exception. I will say one thing about the man whose choices forced a reckoning. I will not define him by one night. Yet I will not excuse what he did. Accountability is not vengeance. It is clarity. When a leader treats dignity as optional, communities reconsider their investment and markets react because people redirect attention. Let this lesson outlive the headline. Dominance is brittle. Decency endures. Now I am asking you for 3 actions. First, subscribe to this mission so we can build a global circle that shares tools, case studies, and training open to all. We will publish checklists that any team can adopt, from hiring to product design to customer care. Second, share this message with one friend, one group chat, and one leader who needs it. Add your story and your pledge. Third, reflect before you close this stream. Choose one habit you will change this week to treat every person with dignity, and then do it. Teach it to someone younger. Ask someone older to hold you accountable. Small habits scale, and they travel farther than slogans. Here is the future we can build together. Meetings start on time because respect begins with clocks. Product reviews include privacy by design because consent is a promise, not a checkbox. Supervisors ask new hires how they like feedback and then keep that agreement. Vendors sign contracts that protect workers up and down the supply chain. Whistleblowers keep their health insurance in their careers. Colleagues disagree without humiliation. Customers trust that their data will not be repackaged against them. Investors reward patience during repairs. Students practice brave listening. Neighborhoods feel safer because people look out for one another with the same focus they bring to metro. I wear a small bracelet that reminds me of where I started. When I touch it, I remember a child learning bus routes, a mother who kept showing up, and a night when calm turned the spotlight into a mirror. I remember the server who caught a glass midair, the harpist who left a silent bar to hold its shape, the manager who kept the lights bright so truth could not hide. I remember millions of you choosing to watch with care and speak with spot. Whether you run a company or a classroom, whether you edit code or budgets, whether you film, paint, research, teach, deliver, repair, or serve, you carry power that matters. So here is my closing request. Simple and strong. If this message moved you, subscribe so you can join a community building real tools for real places. Share this now with 3 people who would stand beside you when hard times arrive. And before you scroll away, pause and write one line about how you will treat the next person you meet, with respect, with patience, with the courage to defend their worth. If someone tries to shrink it, post that line where you will see it tomorrow. Turn private conviction into public practice. If this speech reaches you on a bus, at a counter, in a lab, or between classes, know this: your choices count. Choose one brave sentence today, one respectful act tomorrow, and one repair by Friday. Share them with your circle and invite them to do the same. Repeat weekly until courage feels like a habit. We can build companies that earn loyalty, streets that feel kinder, schools that teach brave listening, and feeds that carry stories of repair as powerfully as they carry outrage. We can make excellence and empathy partners instead of rivals. We can prove that profit grows best in soil enriched by fairness. I believe this because I have seen courage bloom in unlikely places, and because I believe you are ready to lead where you are. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for protecting one another when rooms tilt. Thank you for believing that integrity scales and that dignity is non-negotiable. My name is Nia Carter. This is our shared work. Subscribe, share, and reflect. Start tonight, continue tomorrow, and keep going until treating every person with dignity feels as natural as breathing. When that day comes, we will not need a viral video to remind us who we are. We will already be living it.